The storm outside Starbucks mirrored the charged atmosphere within. Rain pounded against the cafe's glass walls, blurring the world beyond, while inside, the line crept forward, inch by excruciating inch. Maya Jackson, a poised black woman in a smart navy blazer, stood midway down the queue, her fingers wrapped around the strap of her handbag, eyes flickering over the bustling cafe. She was here for a moment's peace, a short coffee break between meetings, but the anticipation of calm was quickly unraveling. Behind her, an impatient sigh cut through the low hum of chatter. Karen Mitchell, a woman in her 40s with perfectly styled hair and designer heels, tapped her foot and cast sharp glances at the baristas, clearly displeased with the wait. Her frustration was palpable, her voice low but biting as she muttered under her breath, "Ridiculous, unbelievable service." Maya caught the words, a subtle tension tightening in her shoulders. She'd encountered people like this before, restless, easily irked, and quick to blame others for the slightest inconvenience. As Karen's mumbled complaints grew louder, Maya's gaze remained calm, fixed on the menu board, though she couldn't ignore the prickling unease creeping in. The line moved forward, and Maya took her turn at the counter, placing her order with a polite nod to the barista, who offered a tired but grateful smile. She could feel Karen's eyes boring into her back, the woman's energy more charged than ever. Maya sensed the disturbance coming before she could even turn around. As the barista handed her the drink, Maya murmured a quick "thank you" and stepped aside, intending to avoid any confrontation. But then Karen's voice rang out, sharp and insistent, slicing through the cafe's gentle buzz. "Oh, I see how it is." Karen scoffed, loud enough to turn heads. Her voice dripped with disdain, and her gaze lingered, seething with an unspoken accusation. Maya stiffened, feeling every eye in the cafe swivel toward her, an audience forming for a confrontation she hadn't asked for. Karen's words hung heavily in the air, and a palpable silence filled the space, thick with anticipation and judgment. In the corner, near the window fogged by the rain, sat a man who had watched the scene unfold with quiet attention. He set down his newspaper, his fingers still pressed against the paper's edges, his gaze fixed on Karen. There was something unreadable in his expression, calm, resolute, and curiously attentive. Maya's pulse quickened as she weighed her next move, feeling the intensity of the stranger's eyes from across the room. She could sense that Karen wasn't finished. There was more to come, and the storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing within Starbucks. If this story is pulling you in, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. Stories like this, real, raw moments where people's true colors are revealed, are ones you won't want to miss. The tension was thick enough to cut. Maya, clutching her coffee cup, prepared to walk away, but Karen's voice sharpened, loud and accusing. "Oh, don't just pretend you didn't hear me," Karen called out, her voice dripping with disdain. "I don't know who you think you are, but some of us have been waiting here longer, doing things the right way. I'm sure you'd have a lot to say if someone cut in front of you." Karen's words rang out like a fire alarm, making heads turn, patrons shifting uncomfortably. The barista froze behind the counter, his fingers hovering over a tray, as his eyes darted between Maya and the irate woman. Maya felt a flicker of heat rising in her chest, but she steadied herself, meeting Karen's glare with calm composure. "Mom, I'm not sure what you think happened, but I waited my turn. Same as everyone else," Maya replied evenly, though her voice was low and controlled. "Oh, I see," Karen sneered, her eyes narrowing. "We've all seen this kind of thing before. Some people just can't help but expect special treatment." A murmur ran through the cafe, a subtle wave of discomfort rippling among the other patrons. Maya glanced around, catching the concerned glances of strangers, each one a silent witness to Karen's growing hostility. But Karen wasn't done. She let out a loud, exaggerated sigh and rolled her eyes, looking around as though seeking support. "This whole place is a mess. Is this the kind of service we're paying for?" she muttered, her voice rising again. If people can't follow basic etiquette, I don't know why they bother coming in at all. It's not like everyone deserves to be here. A quiet gasp escaped from someone in the corner, and Maya felt the weight of Karen's words sink in, each one crafted with the precision of a well-aimed arrow. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the room. "Excuse me." The voice was calm, yet firm, resonating with a quiet authority that instantly commanded attention. It came from the man sitting near the window, the one who had been watching intently since the scene began. Karen whipped around to face him, her mouth open in surprise, and her demeanor suddenly shifted, caught off guard. This was a man with presence, someone who didn't look like he could be intimidated easily. He stood slowly, every movement deliberate, and met Karen's gaze with an unwavering look. "I don't mean to intrude," he began, his voice level and unshaken, "but I think you may be misunderstanding the situation." He glanced toward Maya, his expression softening for a brief second, before his gaze returned to Karen, now sharp and assessing. "And perhaps there's more to consider than meets the eye." Karen faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. It was clear that she wasn't expecting a challenge, especially not from a stranger. She hesitated, taking in the man's calm but resolute stance. Around them, the patrons held their breath, sensing a shift in the atmosphere as the man's presence grounded the room. "I'm sorry, who are you to get involved?" Karen snapped, though her voice wavered slightly. She folded her arms tightly, attempting to hold on to her bluster, but the impact of his words seemed to chip away at her confidence. The man took a step closer, his gaze steady, never breaking contact. "Just another customer, here for a coffee, same as everyone else." He gestured around the cafe, his eyes sweeping over the silent crowd. "But it seems to me that sometimes we see what we expect to see, rather than what's actually happening." Maya watched, her breath held, as Karen's face went through a series of expressions: anger, confusion, then something closer to shame, though fleeting. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The man's quiet authority had cast a spell over the room, and Karen's usual confidence seemed to falter under his gaze. Feeling the eyes of everyone on her, Karen lowered her gaze, retreating slightly, but the tension was still thick. The room charged with unspoken words, unaddressed judgments hanging in the air. And for a moment, Maya felt a surge of strength, quiet but powerful, rising within her. This was more than just a moment. It was a stand. Karen's confidence flickered under the stranger's calm gaze, but her pride flared back just as quickly, a defensive wall rising between her and the quiet authority radiating from him. "Oh, I see," Karen sneered, her voice tinged with a mix of sarcasm and disbelief. "Another one of those people who thinks they can lecture anyone. What do you know about what I'm seeing?" She let out a bitter laugh. "If you think some stranger is going to teach me a lesson, think again." The man's expression remained unshaken, his composure as steady as ever. If her words had any impact, it didn't show. His eyes, deep and reflective, held an intensity that hinted at experience, a lifetime's worth of encounters, perhaps even moments like this one. Yet he offered her a slight nod, acknowledging her without backing down. "I understand your frustration," he began, his voice as calm and deliberate as before. "Sometimes we all feel the world doesn't quite align with our expectations, but maybe it's worth considering," he continued, his gaze unwavering, "that those expectations could be..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "A little skewed?" Karen rolled her eyes, crossing her arms more tightly. She shifted her stance, sizing him up. "Look, I don't know who you think you are or what you're trying to do here, but this little show of yours, it's not going to work on me. Some of us just expect things to be done right and not compromised by others who just don't belong." Her words lingered in the air, weighted and venomous. The barista's eyes darted nervously, and the quiet chatter among other patrons had ceased altogether, leaving only the muffled hum of the espresso machine. Maya watched the scene unfold, her grip on her coffee cup tightening. torn between stepping back and intervening. The man took a slow breath, keeping his gaze locked on Karen. A quiet strength radiated from him, his presence commanding without a hint of force. He smiled gently, as if remembering something from long ago, and nodded. I suppose we all belong somewhere, though it seems we often forget how easy it is to misplace someone's worth in our assumptions. Karen's lip curled. Oh, please, don't patronize me. I don't need some lecture on life from you. Perhaps not, he replied smoothly. But I suspect there's a reason you're upset. Maybe there's a chance to reconsider this moment. He gestured lightly around the cafe, as one that reflects on each of us. It's easy to look past people when we think we know who they are, but that perspective can be limited. Karen's brow furrowed. She opened her mouth to reply, but he continued, not aggressively, but with the same gentle resolve. Take it from someone who's watched people underestimate each other countless times, he said, his voice calm, yet carrying a note of something deeper. Sometimes the person we judge the quickest has traveled a longer road than we'll ever know. For a moment, a strange flicker of doubt crossed Karen's face, but she quickly shook it off. Oh, is that so? So now you're some kind of philosopher? She scoffed, her tone laced with sarcasm. Who do you think you are, coming here and preaching at me like I'm some naive child? The man chuckled lightly, as though her reaction was neither surprising nor offensive. He merely leaned back slightly, hands relaxed at his sides, and shrugged. Who I am doesn't matter here, he replied, his voice carrying an enigmatic calm. But perhaps who you see me as does. Karen's eyes narrowed, frustration brimming as her attempts to fluster him fell flat. She scoffed again, shifting uncomfortably as though sensing there was more to him than met the eye. Maya glanced at him, her curiosity piqued. She caught his steady gaze, and for the first time, she sensed that perhaps he was holding something back, an identity he wasn't revealing, a role he chose to keep hidden. It's just a thought, he added, glancing around, taking in the silent onlookers. We're all connected here, aren't we? This cafe, this conversation, perhaps there's more to each of us than our first impressions suggest. Karen glanced around, noticing for the first time that no one else seemed to share her frustration. The onlookers were still, expressions somewhere between curiosity and silent disapproval. She bristled, her face growing red as her gaze bounced from one person to another. The man's eyes softened as he regarded her, and he leaned slightly forward, his voice quiet but unmistakable. We all have our places. Some are seen, some are hidden. It's what we do in these moments that often defines us. Karen stared at him, momentarily speechless, clearly unsettled by the calm strength in his words. The silence in the cafe grew heavy, and it was as though everyone present understood something profound had just been said, even if they couldn't quite put it into words. Maya watched him, her heart pounding. She sensed something significant beneath his simple words, a truth that resonated deeply within her. There was a story there, a life that had taught him far more than he was willing to share. But in that moment, she knew he wasn't speaking just for her sake. He was reaching out quietly, even to someone like Karen. As Karen faltered, eyes darting nervously, she seemed to sense it too, but her pride wouldn't allow her to soften, and she drew herself up, attempting to hold onto her authority. The man simply offered a nod, acknowledging her, his face remaining composed, unreadable, yet strangely kind. For Karen, the man's words lingered like an echo she couldn't shake. He'd given nothing of himself away, yet somehow his mere presence seemed to make her question the very assumptions she held so tightly. Karen's frustration was palpable, and as she looked around the cafe, her eyes darting from the calm stranger to the silent crowd, her face flushed with anger, she took a step forward, her voice rising as if trying to reassert control. This is ridiculous. I don't know why any of you think you're better than me, she scoffed, her voice shaking slightly. I have every right to call out bad behavior. people these days don't respect tradition or rules. They just expect everything handed to them. And you? She gestured dismissively toward the man, her tone dripping with contempt. You're just a... Nobody sticking your nose in where it doesn't belong. The man met her gaze without flinching, a small, almost pitying smile playing at his lips. He took a slow breath, steady and unperturbed, before finally speaking. You're right about one thing, he began, his voice as calm as before. I'm here to observe, and in my life, I've learned that what we see often has more to do with ourselves than with what's right in front of us. He leaned forward just slightly, his voice softening. I've seen countless people judged unfairly because of appearances, expectations, because someone decided they didn't belong. Karen blinked, her expression momentarily confused, as if she were beginning to sense a layer to his words that she hadn't anticipated. Who do you think you are? She shot back, her voice less certain now, glancing around at the other patrons who were watching with quiet support for the man and Maya, her fingers clenched tightly around her handbag. Acting like you have all the answers? The man shrugged, a flicker of humor crossing his face. Just someone who's had the privilege of seeing what happens when we don't jump to conclusions. He glanced around, acknowledging the quiet crowd that had taken his side, his voice taking on a soft but unmistakable authority. I've worked with many people, good, honest people, who have been on the receiving end of the kind of judgment you're showing here. A murmur ran through the crowd. A young woman near the counter, watching from behind her laptop, nodded in agreement. Another patron, an older man with a kind face, leaned toward Karen with a disapproving shake of his head. The quiet unity of the crowd was making itself known, and Karen could feel it, a shift she hadn't prepared for. Maya's heart pounded as she took in the support around her, a quiet strength rising within her. She met Karen's gaze, and with her own calm confidence, finally spoke. It's about respect, Maya said, her voice steady, carrying an authority she hadn't intended but fully embraced. No one deserves to be treated like they're less than or like they don't belong. That's something we should all understand by now. She glanced around, nodding gratefully at the stranger and the supportive onlookers, her voice becoming stronger. And maybe it's time to rethink what we expect from each other. Karen's face flushed deeper, her hand tightening around her bag. She looked around, her gaze darting from face to face, each one returning her with nothing but calm support for Maya. It was clear now, no one in the cafe agreed with her. She had lost her authority, and her usual pride couldn't rescue her. The man gave Maya an approving nod, a sense of pride shining in his eyes. He turned to Karen one last time, his voice kind yet resolute. We all belong to each other, in one way or another, he said. I've had the chance to see what happens when we support one another and offer each other the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it's worth considering that as we move forward. Karen stared at him, something in her expression softening, if only for a moment. The weight of the crowd's disapproval and the man's words finally broke through her defenses, though she struggled to mask it. She scoffed, brushing an invisible speck off her coat. Well, I'm not staying here to be lectured by strangers, she muttered, turning sharply on her heel. Without another word, she stormed toward the door, her heels clicking against the tile. She left without looking back, her presence leaving the cafe in a lingering hush. As the door closed behind her, the tension lifted and the room filled with a quiet, collective relief. Maya let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, the calm stranger offering her an encouraging smile. Thank you, she said softly, gratitude in her voice. I'm not sure I could have handled that without you. The man shrugged modestly, his gaze steady. No thanks needed. You handled it well. He glanced around at the patrons who were returning to their seats, offering Maya a final nod. Sometimes, the quietest strength is the one that speaks the loudest. With that, he turned to leave, blending back into the background as if nothing had happened. But Maya watched him go, her curiosity lingering. She wondered who he was, what stories he carried behind that calm exterior. And though she never learned his name, she felt certain that his words would stay with her long after he left. As the stranger disappeared into the rainy street, Maya stood still, her thoughts racing through the words he had left behind. The hum of conversation in the cafe gradually returned, but her heart was still pounding, every part of the encounter vivid in her mind. She replayed the stranger's composed expression, the effortless way he had turned Karen's accusations into a lesson, not just for her, but for everyone there. Maya's gaze drifted toward the window, where raindrops slid down in blurred streams, smudging the city beyond. She took a slow breath, feeling the weight of what had just unfolded. The words he'd spoken had felt so personal, so intentional. It was as if he had seen into her soul, giving her the validation she hadn't even realized she needed. "Excuse me," a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Maya turned to find the barista, who offered a shy smile. "That was something. I'm sorry you had to deal with that." Maya returned his smile, nodding. "Thank you. I didn't expect any of it, really." The barista glanced toward the door where Karen had left. People like that. Sometimes they just want to feel powerful. It's rare to see someone stand up to them the way you and that man did. It takes courage. Maya felt a warmth bloom in her chest. "I guess I just needed a reminder that it's okay to stand up for myself." Her gaze dropped to her coffee cup, now lukewarm in her hands, the words of the stranger still echoing in her mind. As she took a seat by the window, she couldn't help but wonder who he was. His presence had been both humbling and empowering, his demeanor calm but purposeful. She remembered his choice of words, the way he'd hinted at experience without ever revealing exactly who he was. It was as if he had wanted her to see the lesson more than the man himself. A murmur of conversation picked up around her. Other patrons shared knowing glances and exchanged small nods, the tension of Karen's departure lingering in their shared relief. The young woman who had been working on a laptop approached Maya's table with a gentle smile. "I just wanted to say, that was inspiring," she said, her eyes full of empathy. "You didn't let her intimidate you. I think a lot of us in here felt that moment." Maya smiled back, feeling a sense of unity with the stranger, the barista, and all those who had supported her in that small, unspoken way. "Thank you. I think we all need reminders of our worth sometimes," she replied, her words as much to herself as to the woman. As the cafe returned to its usual rhythm, Maya found herself looking out into the rain, imagining the stranger walking off into the city, his presence now as anonymous as when he'd arrived. She realized that despite Karen's behavior, she was leaving the cafe with something powerful, a sense of empowerment that went beyond the moment. It was a reminder that she could face the world on her own terms, that she was worthy of respect no matter who stood in her way. In the end, perhaps that was the man's true identity, a reminder that strength often came from quiet confidence, from standing firmly in one's truth, regardless of who might try to shake it. As Maya sat there, she felt a shift, a deep sense of clarity settling within her. The encounter had left her with more than just a story to tell. It had given her a new perspective, one she knew she would carry with her from that day forward. The stranger's words echoed in her mind, a quiet reminder of a powerful truth. Real strength doesn't come from overpowering others, but from standing firm in who you are, knowing your worth, and giving others the respect they deserve. Maya realized that judgment, whether directed at others or toward herself, was often rooted in fear and misunderstanding. The lesson she had learned wasn't only about facing down a difficult person, but about shifting her perspective to see beyond first impressions and biases. And as she watched the rain fall, she felt a sense of peace in knowing that she was enough. No one else's judgment could change that.